Hello everyone and welcome to Recipe for Reality Small Bites, where I take a topic that has to do with the most recent episode of Survivor 47 and discuss it on podcast form, where you can't see my face. All I'm looking at are my notes, which are very, very brief and kind of scattered all over the place. It's just a bunch of people's names on a page. You would be terrified to see it. But I actually was going to make this video in regard to the first episode of the season, which was the John Lovett blindside, because I was thinking, you know what, John Lovett was a celebrity, let's talk about other celebrities on the show. But then this past week, I put off that video because I just didn't have the time to do so, and then this past week we lose kind of the other celebrity of the season, which is Asia Welch, who is not a huge celebrity, obviously, but is a big sort of celebrity in the Survivor realm, obviously, as an RHAP podcaster. So, very sad that we have to be making this video on this topic, because two big figures headed into season 47 have already been eliminated. But I thought this was a great opportunity to talk about my top 10 favorite Survivor celebrities. And I have to kind of make a caveat of like what this list actually is. I'm not going to be ranking their games, because I think there are celebrities who've come and played really good games. There's celebrities that have played really bad games, but this is going to be ranking how much I enjoyed watching that celebrity on that season. My favorite celebrity characters, cast members on their seasons, which could be an episode, as we just saw with John. It could be 10 episodes. It could be someone who made the finals. It could be someone who even won the game. Actually, I don't think there's any celebrities now that I'm looking that have won the game. I'm also not counting anyone that is a celebrity after the fact, so I'm not counting Chase Rice or Whitney Duncan, these people who went on to have successful careers after the fact, or like Elizabeth Hasselbeck. These are all people who became famous after Survivor, some of them because of Survivor, so I didn't want to include them in this list. These are people that were celebrities, went on the island, made an impact as a Survivor player, whether they lasted long or not, and my overall enjoyment. I have a lot of lists of celebrities here, so I'm not going to show pictures for all of them in honorable mentions, but I just want to rattle off some of the names that were at least, on the radar. Ashley Massaro from Survivor China, Mari Takahashi, the famous gamer from Millennials vs. Gen X, David Sampson, owner of the Marlins on Survivor Cagayan, Ronnie Barda, professional poker player, Garrett Adelstein, professional poker player, Katrina from Heroes vs. Healers vs. Hustlers was an Olympic swimmer. Obviously, we have John Rocker, Julia Landauer, who is a racer, if I am not mistaken. She was a car racer. Tom Laidlaw, a Canadian hockey player. Anna Kate was also a poker player. Steve Wright, a football player. Elizabeth Beisel was an Olympic swimmer. And then Grant from Redemption Island was also a football player. None of them even came close to my honorable mentions, though. I never really considered them, but I did write down at least every celebrity I could think of. So those were all the celebrities. And then 4 people that didn't make it on the list just because they are celebrities to CBS fans, but I feel like general-wise, they're not really huge celebrities. So Caleb, Beast Mode Cowboy, Nadia and Natalie, and Hayden, they are all players that came from either Big Brother or The Amazing Race. Obviously, Nadia and Natalie played on The Amazing Race. Caleb and Hayden from Survivor. I didn't include any of them because they are kind of like celebrities to me, but are they actually huge celebrities? Do they have a big following outside of the realm of reality TV? And the answer is not really. I don't think you could just see anyone on the street who knows who the Twinnies are unless you watched The Amazing Race or now Survivor. So, everyone I considered had a following going into the season for something that was completely unreality TV related. So I do have some honorable mentions. The first being my winner pick from Heroes vs. Healers vs. Hustlers, which is Alan Ball, which I will say, not a good player at all, but very entertaining for the amount of time he's out there. I also considered John Robert from China. He was a professional poker player going in. Not a huge celebrity, but he is one of the biggest figures of that season. I also, considered Cliff Robinson, rest in peace. Very nice, warm presence on one of the best casts in history. Another one who kind of fits a similar mold is Dan Barry on Panama. He was an astronaut. I really like Dan, but he didn't do enough to make a top 10. Another tough cut, a big surprising cut, was Jeff Kent. I really like Jeff Kent on Philippines, but I think there have just been other Survivor contestants since that have kind of taken his spot in terms of athletes, so I've really enjoyed watching play. Similarly, I have Scott Pollard and Brad Culpepper, 2 players I don't really like, but obviously had big impacts on their season. Scott with the move against Ty. Of course, Brad Culpepper makes it all the way to the finale on his second season. He also has those iconic moments in Blood vs. Water. I also consider Jimmy Johnson. Obviously, it was great to see him there, but he didn't deliver. He tried to quit the game. He wasn't the most fun Survivor character, but I mean, just watching Jimmy Johnson on Survivor was really, admittedly, pretty cool. And then my last cut, my number 11, if you will, that would have been on the list before Survivor 47 would have been Ron Clark, who obviously brings such a great kind of almost villainous vibe to his season. I was really surprised by how Ron Clark played, and I really liked Ron Clark, but just missed out on this list just because the 10 people I put on I like even more. But kicking it off, at number 10, I do have our most recent celebrity that is not a RHAP celebrity, but is a real celebrity in the big podcasting world, which is Jon Lovett. Obviously, we only saw him for one episode, but Jeff hyped him up, teased in the preseason press that he was one of the best storytellers this season, or the show has ever had, and I actually agree. I think his storytelling on the season was so captivating that even though he was only there for an episode, I was just drawn into everything he was saying. I was loving what he was saying. Quite literally, it's in his last name, love. But I do think he just brought such a fun kind of outlook on the game that I think he was just kind of put on the wrong tribe with a bunch of younger people. I think if he's on a different tribe, maybe on the blue tribe with Sue and with Gabe, who really wants to play hard out the gate, maybe there's a chance where Jon gets his footing. But even if he's out in one episode, he really delivered. He gave great confessionals. He was great on the mat chat. He was, very fun to watch in camp life, in the different social dynamics. And I just like him as a person. I've liked listening to his interviews. He's been clearly a very good sport about it. So I wanted to give him his due here. At number 9 is someone who's much more soft-spoken than Jon, but who has been, a big prolific athlete, went on the show, and then has since gone on to bigger shows and actually won the challenge. It is Danny McRae from Survivor 41. I just really like Danny. I really vibe with Danny. I like Danny's kind of cool, calm demeanor. A person like him, I mean, we've seen Alan Ball, like this person who could come out and almost come swinging out the gate too hard, but Danny was the opposite. Danny played it cool, calm, collected. I like how Danny spoke out about the hourglass twist in Survivor 41, basically saying that it was BS, that you literally won your way to the merge, you won an immunity challenge, and then because one person was randomly left out, they smash an hourglass, and now you are vulnerable at Tribal. I agree with Danny, and I think he was big for stepping up. Obviously, he went on to win the challenge, so he's in good hands. He doesn't need Survivor anymore. He doesn't want to come back to Survivor, but I think for the time he was on Survivor, even though he's one of the more under-edited people on his season, I still really enjoyed watching him. At number 8, though, is someone who did not get a small edit. It is John Hennigan, Johnny Mundo, the George Bushy of Tushy, if you will, from Survivor, David vs. Goliath. I mean, this was the epitome of the Goliaths, this huge, hulking, muscular wrestling guy, but he was also very chill, very personable, very likable, to where when he was blindsided, despite the Davids getting a one-up on the Goliaths, I was genuinely upset, when he went home, and I think it just goes to show how lovable and likable he was out there on the island. I'm not a big wrestling guy, but I knew who he was, and I think all his confessionals delivered. Honestly, I think they could have gone even further in kind of featuring him while they had him on the show, but he's one of my favorites of that season. I just really, really enjoy his vibe. Moving on to someone who I didn't love in the moment, but every time I rewatch this season, especially who she's in Final 3 with, has made me enjoy her a lot more, which is Lisa Welchel from The Facts of Life. Obviously makes Final 3 on Philippines. The person I was alluding to is Mike Skupin. I think because I dislike Skupin more and more, the more I find out about him, the more I like Lisa, the way she was able to kind of like deal with these bigger personalities like Abby Maria on the island, or like Michael Skupin, who we've later learned is a problem to deal with. But I really like Lisa. I think she cries a little bit too much, but this game is emotional, and I think we see, especially on those 39-day seasons, like it really does take its toll. But I think her redemption arc to kind of make it to Final Tribal and stand above the odds, I think it's big. I don't think we had seen a celebrity go that far in the game before. Like, she really took, this experience full throttle and really made it to the end, and there's a reason she got the America's Favorite Player Award from Sprint, I believe, at the time. I think that's who was sponsoring it at the time. But I really like Lisa. I think she's warm. I think she's lovable. I think the top 6 all have game moments that make them stand out, whereas Lisa's purely likability. But I had to put her on this list also because she's one of the most successful celebrities to play the game. At number 6 from Survivor Gabon, we have Crystal Cox, who is just a huge character. She obviously isn't a great game player, even though she does kind of dominate the game with Kenny for a period of time, but she's clearly an underdog because she ends up being really bad at challenges. And I think the reason I love Crystal on that season on Gabon is because she's coming into the game as this Olympic runner, this famous Olympic runner, and then she ends up really not being a very big asset in challenges. And as much as it sucks to see an Olympic athlete suffer and struggle out there, I thought it made for excellent television. And I think her voting confessionals are all great. The goodbye, go home, with Randy, I just think she delivers every single second she's on screen. But it is frustrating to watch, especially if you're a fan of hers. I can imagine it was frustrating, but right kind of lockstep with her at number 5, I have from that very same season her partner in crime, Kenny, who I don't think people realize was a big gamer at the time. He was a very famous, I believe, Super Smash Bros. Player, which, again, a very niche community. I wouldn't really consider him a celebrity, but if you think about the rules, he is not a Survivor celebrity. He is not famous for reality TV. He's famous in the video game world, so I counted it. If Rome on this season is being called a famous game commentator, then we can call Kenny a famous gamer, similar to how Mari was on Millennials vs. Gen X. And I think Kenny, any list I can get him on, I'm going to put him on because he is so likable, so well equipped for this game, so strategic. I think the downfall for Kenny is the fact that he's playing on a season with a bunch of people who don't know how to play the game, to where he ends up just sticking out due to just having the most competent mind for the game. Everyone realizes he's the biggest threat and takes him out because of it. I think it's just because he got cocky and kind of played too hard too early. But again, on a season like this, how can you not play too hard too early when you are the most competent thinker out there? I guess Maddie and Sugar had their moments of competent thinking as well, but like looking at Bob and Susie and his partner in crime Crystal and Randy and Corinne, like these are big personalities to navigate, and I still think Ken is a standout. At number 4, a person that is largely forgotten about but has some really great Survivor stats, and someone who I always love watching on this season, which is Survivor Guatemala, and that is Gary Hogaboom, who went by Gary Hawkins. This was one of the first, if not the first, celebrities the show ever saw, because before then they really cast all these no names. Gary was the first big high profile name they had on the show, and I love how he kind of made that a strategy. He went into the game, told everyone his name was Gary Hawkins, he was a landscaper. He ends up finding the first idol in Survivor history. So I really like Gary Hogaboom. I think he's a very underrated player, a very underrated character. I mean, he was a football player, but he came out trying to just be like the kind of affable dad character. But then you also start to see when that competitive side kind of kicks in, and Gary kind of has those moments where he does come on a little strong. But I do think Gary's just a fascinating player. I wish we could have seen him play again. I feel like someone like Brad Culpepper kind of emulates what Gary could have been on a return, kind of dominating the game from a physical perspective and then also having the numbers by being this kind of big force of nature. But I think Gary also has a softer side. I think the dynamic between him and Danny is fun, how Danny kind of recognizes him because she, obviously is I think, is she married to one of the Kansas City Chiefs, or she, has a connection to the Kansas City Chiefs. She's a reporter or something at the time. I can't remember completely, but she immediately knew who Gary was and kind of outed him, which also created a cool dynamic, which we would see later on with like Cliff Robinson and Woo, this idea of someone recognizing you and like, how do you manage that? And I love how Gary was trying to strategically avoid being recognized. I think it adds to a fun dynamic on that season. So Gary's my number 4, but my top 3 from the top were always very definitive. These are the top 3 celebrities that when I was putting this list together, there was no doubt who my top 3 was. Now, the order is a little tougher, but my number 3 is going to be Taj from Survivor Gabon. Again, a celebrity because of who she was married to, but, she was a very well-known name going on this season. Everyone was saying, oh, Eddie George's wife, which, like, I guess you could say, like, that's not a celebrity, but she was a well-known figure going into the season. Listen, I'm counting her because, again, any excuse I can have to put Taj on this list, similar to Kenny, I'm going to. If it's a stretch, then you can put her off the list and put Jimmy Johnson on or Ron Clark on. But I thought there was fun adding more women to the list and having Taj here representing, because Taj is my favorite on that season. I love Steven Fishback a lot, but Taj was my favorite. Taj was the person I was rooting for to win. Taj was just wholesome. She kind of reminds me of Suri, but like a little less cutthroat, which I think did her in, but also made her very likable at the time. And I do think, she is someone who I think everyone thinks deserved a second shot to get another chance to play the game, and not necessarily play the game for someone else like she played for JT. But I will always remember Taj's best moment, which is at that auction when she's looking at the phone and it says, see you back at the camp, when Eddie George says, see you back at the camp, and she doesn't process it. And then Jeff's like, did you get that last part? And she's like, see you back at the camp. And she like goes crazy with her phone and starts hugging Jeff and goes back to camp. And then she ends up giving everyone else the reward so she can go spend a private night with Eddie. I just think it's a great story. I love Taj on that season. I think Steven and JT are clearly the leads of that season, as well as Coach, in terms of big characters, but Taj is right up there. I mean, Taj has a lot of confessionals, a lot of screen time. I really like Taj, but my top 2 were even more definitive. My number 2, it's tough, but I'm going to go with Mike White. I mean, this was one of the hugest gets for celebrities on Survivor. I think this is either him or Lisa Whelchel or Jimmy Johnson is probably the biggest celebrity they've ever had on the show. Mike White, obviously an actor. You might recognize him from School of Rock, but he was also a writer. He just did White Lotus, which is, of course, after Survivor, but he had written a lot before Survivor. I think he wrote School of Rock. So he was a famous writer, and he was also on The Amazing Race. The difference is he was on The Amazing Race as a celebrity as well. So that's where I distinguished him from Nadia and Natalie. That's where I think he belongs on this list, is because he was a full-on celebrity. And I thought he played it so well because his threat level was always low because no one thought that he was going to beat them at the end. But honestly, he could have beat them at the end. The problem is, I don't think he wanted to. I think he was fine, content just making it to the end and just calling it a day. But I just love Mike. I think he has some great character moments, him walking around the island with his glass of wine, all the different kind of snarky comments and confessionals. I mean, when you have a writer on the show, they're going to naturally provide really great commentary. I mean, you look at David Wright, you look at Cochran, who were not celebrities. They kind of got their jobs after Survivor in terms of big mainstream writing jobs for CBS. But like, the writers clearly know how to deliver on confessionals. You see it with John Lovett too. Just this natural ability to talk and to captivate. It's what I would hope to do if I were to ever go on the island, just be a good storyteller, which I think is the most important thing, win or lose, is to be able to captivate an audience. Because, hey, if you're first out or you're last out, you want to be seen as much as possible. You want people to have the best grasp of your game. And in order to do so, you need to be good on the camera. And I think Mike is definitely that. I would have loved to see him win, especially in retrospect, given who actually did win that season. Oof, I would have gone for Mike. But my number one, he's one of my favorite players of all time. I've talked about him on this channel before, so I'm not going to go too in depth, but it is the only celebrity to play more than once that isn't Brad Culpepper, and it is Jonathan Penner. I love Penner. I think he's great. I don't love his movies very much. Don't tell him I said that. His movies aren't great, but he is great, and I think he's just a lovely presence on the island. I think as we see him with each iteration, he gets more lovable from like an emotional perspective, but from the top, he's always been a really great confessional giver, a really great comedian. He's been a little bit of a hard ass at times, but that's also why you kind of love Penner. But then, as I said, by the end of Philippines, you actually feel like you like Penner the person. He's not just a character. He is this fully fleshed out, well-rounded arc of a person. And especially seeing Yul come back on Winner's of War and talk about Jonathan's wife, Stacy, and her fight with ALS, and sadly losing Stacy to ALS. I think that's her name. I hope I'm saying her name right. I don't have the notes, but I believe her name was Stacy. But I mean, I think that's added even more to Jonathan Penner's legacy. The fact that Yul went out to Winners at War to play for Jonathan. I just think Jonathan has so many iconic moments. Obviously, the idol moment with Yul. He obviously gets medevaced in Micronesia, but not without saying "my ass" to Jeff. And then obviously in Philippines, his exit, his idol plays. I mean, that is really where we get the most fruit from John Penner's game. So Penner has always been one of my favorite players. He's always been a top 10 player of mine, and I do think part of that is because he was a celebrity. We didn't know how he'd do, but he went out there, he delivered in both entertainment and in gameplay. So there we go, my top 10 favorite celebrity games on Survivor. Again, not judging them by the games, but just judging them on how much of an impact they made despite being a celebrity or because they were a celebrity, and just how much I enjoyed them on those seasons. So that is the end of the video, a little bit shorter this week, but thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more Recipe for Reality Small Bites next week. Thanks.